The will to truth which will still tempt us to many a venture, that famous truthfulness of which all philosophers so far have spoken with respect, what questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, wicked, questionable questions! That is a long story even now, and yet it seems as if it had scarcely begun. Is it any wonder that we should finally become suspicious, lose patience, and tum away impatiently? That we should finally leam from this sphinx to ask questions too? Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What in us really wants truth? Indeed, we came to a long halt at the question about the cause of this will, until we finally came to a complete stop before a still more basic question. We asked about the value of this will. Suppose we want truth, why not rather untruth, and uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of the value of truth came before us, or was it we who came before the problem? Who of us is Oedipus here? Who, the Sphinx? It is a rendezvous, it seems, of questions me question marks. And though it scarcely seems credible, it finally almost seems to us as if the problem had never even been put so far, as if we were the first to see it, fix it with our eyes, and risk it. For it does involve a risk, and perhaps there is none that is greater. How could anything originate out of its opposite? For example, truth out of error, or the will to truth out of the will to deception, or selfless deeds out of selfishness, or the pure and sunlike gaze of the sage out of lust? Such origins are impossible. Whoever dreams of them is a fool, indeed worse. The things of the highest value must have another, peculiar origin. They cannot be derived from this transitory, seductive, deceptive, paltry world, from this turmoil of delusion and lust. Rather from the lap of being, the intransitory, the hidden God, the thing in itself, there must be their basis, and nowhere else. This way of judging constitutes the typical prejudgment and prejudice which give away the metaphysicians of all ages. This kind of valuation looms in the background of all their logical procedures. It is on account of this faith that they trouble themselves about knowledge, about something that is finally baptized solemnly as the truth. The fundamental faith of the metaphysicians is the faith in opposite values. It has not even occurred to the most cautious among them that one might have a doubt right here at the threshold where it was surely most necessary, even if they vowed to themselves, de omnibus dubitandum. For one may doubt, first, whether there are any opposites at all, and secondly, whether these popular valuations and opposite values on which the metaphysicians put their seal are not perhaps merely foreground estimates, only provisional perspectives, perhaps even from some nook, perhaps from below, frog perspectives, as it were, to borrow an expression painters use. For all the value that the true, the truthful, the selfless may deserve, it would still be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for life might have to be ascribed to deception, selfishness, and lust. It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of these good and revered things is precisely that they are insidiously related, tied to, and involved with these wicked, seemingly opposite things, maybe even one with them in essence. Maybe. But who has the will to concern himself with such dangerous maybes? For that, one really has to wait for the advent of a new species of philosophers, such as have somehow another and converse taste and propensity from those we have known so far. Philosophers of the dangerous maybe, in every sense, and in all seriousness, I see such new philosophers coming up. After having looked long enough between the philosopher's lines and fingers, I say to myself, by far the greater part of conscious thinking must still be included among instinctive activities, and that goes even for philosophical thinking. We have to relearn here, as one has had to relearn about heredity and what is innate, as the act of birth deserves no consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, so being conscious is not in any decisive sense the opposite of what is instinctive. Most of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly guided and forced into certain channels by his instincts. Behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, too, there stand valuations, or more clearly, physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. For example, that the definite should be worth more than the indefinite, and mere appearance worth less than truth. Such estimates might be, in spite of their regulative importance for us, nevertheless mere foreground estimates, a certain kind of niaiserie, which may be necessary for the preservation of just such beings as we are. Supposing, that is, that not just man is the measure of things. The falseness of a judgment is for us not necessarily an objection to a judgment. In this respect, our new language may sound strangest. The question is to what extent it is life-promoting, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps even species-cultivating. And we are fundamentally inclined to claim that the falsest judgments, which include the synthetic judgments a priori, are the most indispensable for us, that without accepting the fictions of logic, without measuring reality against the purely invented world of the unconditional and self-identical, without a constant falsification of the word by means of numbers, man could not live, that renouncing false judgments would mean renouncing life and a denial of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that certainly means resisting accustomed value feelings in a dangerous way, and a philosophy that risks this would by that token alone place itself beyond good and evil. What provokes one to look at all philosophers half suspiciously, half mockingly, is not that one discovers again and again how innocent they are, how often and how easily they make mistakes and go astray, in short, their childishness and childlikeness, but that they are not honest enough in their work, although they all make a lot of virtuous noise when the problem of truthfulness is touched even remotely. They all pose as if they had discovered and reached their real opinions through the self-development of a cold, pure, divinely unconcerned dialectic, as opposed to the mystics of every rank, who are more honest and doltish and talk of inspiration, while at bottom it is an assumption, a hunch, indeed a kind of inspiration, most often a desire of the heart that has been filtered and made abstract, that they defend with reasons they have sought after the fact. They are all advocates who resent that name, and for the most part even wily spokesmen for their prejudices, which they baptize truths, and very far from having the courage of the conscience that admits this, precisely this, to itself. Very far from having the good taste of the you lets this be known, whether to warn an enemy or friend, or from exuberance to mock itself. The equally stiff and decorous tartuffery of the old Kant, as he lures us on the dialectical bypaths that lead to his categorical imperative, really lead astray and seduce. This spectacle makes us smile, as we are fastidious, and find it quite amusing to watch closely the subtle tricks of old moralists and preachers of morals, or consider the hocus-pocus of mathematical form with which Spinoza clad his philosophy, really the love of his wisdom, to render that word fairly and squarely, in mail and mask, to strike terror at the very outset into the heart of any assailant who should dare to glance at that invincible maiden and Pallas Athena. How much personal timidity and vulnerability this masquerade of a sick hermit betrays. Gradually, it has become clear to me what every great philosophy so far has been, namely, the personal confession of its author and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. Also that the moral or immoral intentions in every philosophy constituted the real germ of life from which the whole plant had grown. Indeed, if one would explain how the abstrusest metaphysical claims of a philosopher really came about, it is always well and wise to ask first, at what morality does all this, does he, aim? Accordingly, I do not believe that a drive to knowledge is the father of philosophy, but rather that another drive has, here as elsewhere, employed understanding and misunderstanding as a mere instrument. But anyone who considers the basic drives of man to see to what extent they may have been at play just here as inspiring spirits, or demons and kobolds, will find that all of them have dini philosophy at some time, and that every single one of them would like only too well to represent just itself as the ultimate purpose of existence and the legitimate master of all the other. For every drive wants to be master, and it attempts to philosophize in that spirit. To be sure, among scholars who are really scientific men, things may be different. Better, if you like. There you may really find something like a drive for knowledge, some small independent clockwork that, once well wound, works on vigorously without any essential participation from all the other drives of the scholar. The real interests of the scholar therefore lie usually somewhere else, say in his family, or in making money, or in politics. Indeed, it is almost a matter of total indifference whether his little machine is placed at this or that spot in science, and whether the promising young worker turns himself into a good philologist, or an expert on fungi, or a chemist. It does not characterize him that he becomes this or that. In the philosopher, conversely, there is nothing whatever that is impersonal, and above all, his morality bears decided and decisive witness to who he is. That is, in what order of rank the innermost drives of his nature stand in relation to each other. How malicious philosophers can be! I know of nothing more venomous than the joke Epicurus permitted himself against Plato and the Platonists. He called them Dionysiokolakes. That means literally, and this is the foreground meaning, flatterers of Dionysius. In other words, tyrants, baggage, and lickspittles. But in addition to this, he also wants to say, they are all actors. There is nothing genuine about them, for Dionysiokolax was a popular name for an actor. And the latter is really the malice that Epicurus aimed at Plato. He was peeved by the grandiose manner, the mise-en-scène at which Plato and his disciples were so expert at. There is a point in every philosophy when the philosopher's conviction appears on the stage, or to use the language of an ancient mystery, adventavit asinus, pulcher et fortissim. According to nature, you want to live? Oh, you noble Stoics! What deceptive words these are. Imagine a being like nature, wasteful beyond measure, indifferent beyond measure, without purposes and consideration, without mercy and justice, fertile and desolate and uncertain at the same time. Imagine indifference itself as a power. How could you live according to this indifference? Living, is that not precisely wanting to be other than this nature? Is not living estimating, preferring, being unjust, being limited, wanting to be different? And supposing your imperative live according to nature meant at bottom as much as live according to life, how could you not do that? Why make a principle of what you yourselves are and must be? In truth, the matter is altogether different. While you pretend rapturously to read the canon of your law in nature, you want something opposite. You strange actors and self-deceivers. Your pride wants to impose your morality, your ideal, on nature, even on nature, and incorporate them in her. You demand that she should be nature according to the Stoa, and you would like all. In truth, the matter is altogether different. While you pretend rapturously to read the canon of your law in nature, you want something opposite, you strange actors and self-deceivers. Your pride wants to impose your morality, your ideal, on nature, even on nature, and incorporate them in her. You demand that she should be nature, according to the Stoa, and you would like all. You would like all existence to exist only after your own image, as an immense eternal glorification and generalization of Stoicism. For all your love of truth, you have forced yourselves so long, so persistently, so rigidly hypnotically, to see nature the wrong way, namely, stoically, that you are no longer able to see her differently, and some abysmal arrogance finally still inspires you with the insane hope that because you know how to tyrannize yourselves, stoicism is self-tyranny, nature too lets herself be tyrannized. Is not the Stoic a piece of nature? But this is an ancient, eternal story. What formerly happened with the Stoics still happens today too, as soon as any philosophy begins to believe in itself. It always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical drive itself, the most spiritual will to power, to the creation of the world, to the causa prim. The eagerness and subtlety, I might even say shrewdness, with which the problem of the real and the apparent world is today attacked all over Europe makes one think and wonder, and anyone who hears nothing in the background except a will to truth certainly does not have the best of ears. In rare and isolated instances, it may really be the case that such a will to truth, some extravagant and adventurous courage, a metaphysician's ambition to hold a hopeless position, may participate and ultimately prefer even a handful of certainty to a whole carload of beautiful possibilities. There may actually be puritanical fanatics of conscience who prefer even a certain nothing to an uncertain something to lie down on and die. But this is nihilism, and the sign of a despairing, mortally weary soul, however courageous the gestures of such a virtue may look. It seems, however, to be otherwise with stronger and livelier thinkers who are still eager for life. When they side against appearance and speak of perspective with a new arrogance, when they rank the credibility of their own bodies about as low as the credibility of the visual evidence that the earth stands still, and thus, apparently in good humor, let their securest possession go, for in what does one at present believe more firmly than in one's body? Who knows if they are not trying at bottom to win back something that was formerly an even securer possession, something of the ancient domain of the faith of former times, perhaps the immortal soul, perhaps the old God, in short, ideas by which one could live better, that is to say, more vigorously and cheerfully than by modern ideas. There is mistrust of these modern ideas in this attitude, a disbelief in all that has been constructed yesterday and today. There is perhaps some slight admixture of satiety and scorn, unable to endure any longer the bric-a-brac of concepts of the most diverse origin, which is the form in which so-called positivism offers itself on the market today. A disgust of the more fastidious taste at the village fair mottliness and patchiness of all these reality philosophasters in whom there is nothing new or genuine except this mottliness. In this, it seems to me, we should agree with these skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of today. Their instinct, which repels them from modern reality, is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away. A little more strength, flight, courage, and artistic power, and they would want to rise, not return. It seems to me that today attempts are made everywhere to divert attention from the actual influence Kant exerted on German philosophy, and especially to ignore prudently the value he set upon himself. Kant was first and foremost proud of his table of categories. With that in his hand, he said, "This is the most difficult thing that could ever be undertaken on behalf of metaphysics. Let us only understand this could be." He was proud of having discovered a new faculty in man, the faculty for synthetic judgments, a priori. Suppose he deceived himself in this matter.
支援競技アトロの声ね、女性部長を眠かせる。堕落の話の色は、汎用したものは相対しなければならないという真実を明らかにします。しかし、私たちは例外です。
You utilitarians, you too love everything useful only as a vehicle for your inclinations. You too really find the noise of its wheels insufferable?